In this episode, we begin with a question that matters a great deal in modern governance. What changes when an organization decides to deploy proprietary artificial intelligence, AI, instead of building everything itself or relying only on open models and open tools? For a brand new learner, the word proprietary simply means the system, model, or service is controlled by a company that owns key parts of how it works, how it is delivered, and how others are allowed to use it. That may sound ordinary at first, because many software products are proprietary, but AI adds new layers of complexity because the system may shape decisions, generate content, process sensitive information, and evolve over time in ways the customer cannot fully inspect. That means proprietary AI brings a special mix of opportunity, risk, and obligation that organizations must understand before deployment. The main idea to carry forward from the start is that proprietary AI can be very useful, but it also places the deploying organization in a relationship of dependence that must be governed carefully if leaders want the system to remain trustworthy, explainable, and controllable after it goes live. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is with the opportunity side, because organizations often choose proprietary AI for practical reasons rather than abstract interest. A proprietary system may offer strong performance, polished interfaces, fast deployment, vendor support, and capabilities that would take a long time for an organization to build on its own. For many teams, that means they can experiment, pilot, or scale much faster than they could if they had to assemble every component themselves. A proprietary vendor may also provide updates, safety features, technical expertise, and infrastructure that reduce the initial burden on the customer. For a beginner, this is important because governance is not about assuming proprietary systems are bad simply because another company controls them. In many settings, proprietary AI offers the fastest path to useful capability. The real governance task is not rejecting that value automatically. It is understanding what the organization gains, what it gives up, and what new duties arise once the system becomes part of important work or important decisions. One of the biggest advantages of proprietary AI is convenience joined with maturity. A vendor may offer a model or platform that has already benefited from large-scale training, careful engineering, dedicated security teams, and repeated refinement based on broad customer use. That can make the system more stable, more feature-rich, and easier to integrate into business operations than a homemade alternative. A proprietary provider may also supply documentation, usage controls, service support, and enterprise features that smaller organizations would struggle to create alone. For a beginner, this helps explain why proprietary AI is attractive even to organizations with technical talent. It is not always because they lack skill. Often it is because buying access to a mature system seems more efficient than building and maintaining the same level of capability internally. Still, that efficiency should never hide the governance question underneath it. A system that is easier to deploy may also be harder to inspect, harder to customize deeply, and harder to challenge when something important goes wrong. That leads directly to one of the defining risks of proprietary AI, which is reduced transparency. When the system belongs to another company, the deploying organization may not fully see how the model was trained, how decisions were made about safety settings, what data shaped the model's behavior, or what changes occur behind the scenes over time. Even when the vendor provides useful documentation, the customer often sees only part of the full picture. This matters because governance depends heavily on understanding how a system behaves, where it struggles, and what assumptions shaped its design. For a beginner, the danger is not simply that secrecy feels uncomfortable. The danger is that a system may influence real work while the organization lacks enough visibility to explain why certain outputs appear, why behavior shifts over time, or why certain limitations keep recurring in production. When transparency is reduced, the burden on vendor review, monitoring, and internal controls becomes much more important because the organization cannot rely on deep inspection as easily as it might with a fully internal system. Another major risk is dependence. sometimes called vendor dependence even when people do not use that exact phrase. Once a proprietary AI system becomes embedded in workflows, products, customer support, internal operations, or decision support, the organization may become reliant on that vendor's pricing, uptime, feature roadmap, contract terms, and service quality. At first, this may seem acceptable because the system is delivering obvious value. Over time, however, the relationship can become harder to unwind than leaders expected. Costs may rise, terms may shift, models may change, or support may weaken at exactly the moment when the organization is least prepared to replace the service. For a beginner, this is one of the clearest governance lessons in the topic. Proprietary AI does not create risk only through the model itself. It also creates strategic risk through dependence. If important work cannot continue without that external provider, then the organization needs to understand that dependency before deployment rather than discovering it later when negotiating power is weak and transition options are limited. Data handling is another area where proprietary AI requires careful thought. The organization must know what information will be sent to the system, what information may be stored, how long it may be retained, who may have access to it, and whether the vendor may use that data to improve its own services or models. These questions matter because a proprietary deployment often creates a boundary-crossing relationship. Data that once stayed inside one controlled environment may now move into a service operated elsewhere under rules that are not entirely written by the deploying organization. For a beginner, the key lesson is that data risk in proprietary AI is not only about outright breach. It is also about lawful but poorly understood use, unclear retention, broad internal access at the vendor, and uncertainty about how prompts, outputs, logs, and usage patterns become part of a larger service ecosystem. Strong governance, therefore, requires the organization to match the sensitivity of its information against the real data practices of the vendor rather than assuming enterprise language in a sales conversation automatically resolves those concerns. Intellectual property and control over outputs create a further layer of complexity. A proprietary AI service may produce drafts, recommendations, summaries, code, or analysis that the organization wants to use in products, services, or internal decision-making. Yet the rights attached to those outputs may not always be as simple as teams expect. The organization needs to know whether it can use the outputs commercially, whether the outputs are exclusive in any meaningful sense, and whether the vendor reserves broad rights around usage patterns, derivative insights, or generated material. For a beginner, this matters because proprietary AI is not just a technical asset. It can become part of the organization's knowledge work, customer experience, and intellectual output. If the ownership or permitted use of those results is murky, then the deployment carries more exposure than the business case may reflect. That is why obligations around contract review, licensing, and usage policy are not side issues. They are part of what makes the deployment governable once people begin relying on the output as though it were clearly theirs to use. Change management is especially important with proprietary AI because the vendor often controls major elements of the system's evolution. A provider may update the model, alter safeguards, change retention settings, retire features, adjust performance characteristics, or modify service terms while the customer continues using the system in ongoing operations. Some of those changes may be improvements, but even positive changes can create governance trouble if they alter behavior in ways the organization did not expect or has not reviewed. For a beginner, this point is crucial because it shows why proprietary AI is dynamic in a special way. The organization may have approved one version of the service in one operating condition, but the system that exists 3 months later may not behave exactly the same. If the customer lacks clear notice, reevaluation rights, or strong internal monitoring, it may continue using a materially changed system under old assumptions. That is why a deploying organization has an obligation to treat vendor-driven change as a governance event rather than as background technical noise. Security and resilience also take on a distinctive character in proprietary AI deployments. The organization may depend not only on the quality of the model, but also on the security of the vendor's environment, the strength of its access controls, the integrity of its infrastructure, and the speed with which it can detect and respond to incidents. A proprietary system can therefore create a layered trust problem. The customer is trusting the service to behave well, trusting the vendor to secure it, and trusting the vendor to communicate clearly if something goes wrong. For a beginner, the important lesson is that outsourcing capability never outsources responsibility completely. If the deployment causes harm because the proprietary service is compromised, unavailable, or behaving unpredictably, the organization that chose to deploy it will still have to answer difficult questions from leadership, customers, regulators, auditors, or the public. That means obligations around due diligence, incident planning, fallback procedures, and ongoing monitoring become part of responsible use, even when the deepest infrastructure sits outside the organization's direct control. Despite those risks, proprietary AI can create real strategic opportunity when used thoughtfully. A mature vendor may offer advanced features, faster scaling, stronger language capability, better multilingual support, or more polished user experiences than an organization could produce on its own within a realistic timeframe. In some cases, proprietary AI allows an organization to improve service quality, reduce routine burden on staff, accelerate analysis, or make useful capabilities broadly available to workers who are not technical specialists. For a beginner, this is an important balance point. Governance is not meant to drain value out of innovation. It is meant to help the organization capture value in a disciplined way. The right question is not whether proprietary AI has risk, because every meaningful deployment has risk. The better question is whether the opportunity is important enough and the governance around it strong enough to justify the dependence, data exposure, limited transparency, and operational obligations that come with relying on another company's system. That word obligations matters because the deploying organization still carries duties even when the AI is proprietary. It must assess the vendor, review the contract, evaluate the data path, understand licensing limits, prepare the workforce, monitor live behavior, document decisions, and decide whether the system is appropriate for the seriousness of the use case. It also has to ensure that employees understand what the system is for, what it is not for, and when outputs should be questioned or escalated. For a beginner, this is one of the most important truths in the whole topic. Buying a proprietary AI system does not transfer governance to the vendor. The vendor may carry certain duties, but the deploying organization still owns the choice to place that system into its own workflow, service, or decision environment. Because of that choice, it retains a duty to make sure the deployment is proportionate, transparent enough, monitored appropriately, and supported by human oversight that exists in practice and not just in policy language. There is also an ethical dimension that becomes especially sharp with proprietary AI. If the organization cannot fully inspect the system, cannot clearly explain important aspects of its behavior, or cannot easily influence how it changes over time, then leaders need to think carefully about where that system should and should not be trusted. Some uses may be perfectly reasonable, especially where the stakes are modest and outputs can be reviewed carefully. Other uses may create too much distance between power and accountability, especially if the system influences high-impact decisions or shapes outcomes for people who have little ability to understand or challenge what happened. For a beginner, this ethical issue is not abstract. It asks whether the organization is comfortable placing proprietary automation into a role where the people affected may bear serious consequences while the organization itself lacks deep visibility into how the tool behaves. In sensitive settings, that gap between control and consequence can become one of the strongest arguments for narrowing the use case, increasing human oversight, or choosing a different deployment path altogether. A good way to understand responsible use is to think in terms of fit. Proprietary AI may fit well when the organization needs fast access to mature capability, when data sensitivity is manageable, when contracts and controls are strong, and when the use case allows careful review of outputs before serious consequences follow. It may fit poorly when the use case demands deep explainability, strict control over change, minimal external dependency, or direct confidence about how data is handled and how model behavior evolves. For a beginner, this fit-based thinking is extremely useful because it prevents a false choice between blind enthusiasm and blanket rejection. The real governance challenge is matching the nature of the proprietary system to the seriousness of the task, the tolerance for dependency, the readiness of the workforce, and the ability of the organization to monitor and constrain the deployment after launch. When those factors align, proprietary AI can be a very effective tool. When they do not align, even an impressive system may be the wrong choice. A simple example helps tie all of this together. Imagine an organization wants to deploy a proprietary AI assistant to help staff summarize internal materials and draft responses to common questions. The opportunity is obvious because the vendor offers a polished interface, strong language capability, fast rollout, and lower internal development burden. The risks are also real because sensitive information may pass through the service. The organization may not fully see how the model was trained. The vendor may update the system over time, and staff may overtrust confident outputs. The obligations then become clear. Leaders need to review data handling, licensing, change terms, monitoring plans, user guidance, and escalation paths before launch. For a beginner, that example shows the full shape of proprietary deployment governance. The question is not whether the tool is impressive. The question is whether the organization can use it in a bounded, supervised, and explainable way that fits the value it expects to gain from the relationship. As we close, the central lesson is that deploying proprietary artificial intelligence, AI, creates a distinctive mix of benefit and dependence that organizations must understand before they move from interest to real use. The opportunities can be significant, including faster deployment, mature capability, broad functionality, and reduced internal build burden. The risks are equally real, including reduced transparency, vendor dependence, uncertain data practices, shifting service behavior, intellectual property questions, and limits on direct control. The obligations remain firmly with the deploying organization, which must conduct due diligence, constrain the use case, protect data, prepare users, monitor outcomes, and decide whether the system belongs in that workflow at all. For a new learner, this is the heart of the topic. Proprietary AI is neither automatically safe nor automatically suspect. It is a relationship-based form of capability, and responsible governance means understanding that relationship deeply enough to decide whether the value is worth the exposure and whether the organization is truly ready to live with the consequences of putting that system into the real world.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.